Can you hear me okay? Just checking, Sash. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, everybody, again, apologies for those small technical issues and a little bit of swearing there from me. Hold my hand up. Sorry about that. Technology on a Monday morning, never great. So welcome everybody to this webinar on eco-design for sustainable products regulation and sort of overview of developments. This particular webinar is delivered via the Just Fashion project that is funded by Horizon 2020 and led by the University of Antwerp. The webinar is being recorded, and Sash, if you could just treble check that it is still being recorded, and if not, if you could press the recording button. I think it is. So, as I say, we're going to give an overview of the different regulatory developments. If you have questions, please make them short and succinct and place them in the chat. And my colleague Sash, who's with me today, will be reviewing those, and then we'll pick those up at the end. And I think before I go in, I just make one quick proviso that we are the Centre for Sustainable Design has experienced looking at sort of policy issues for many decades, but we're not lawyers, so any action you take is on your own responsibility. We've made the best attempt to research things in detail, but there is, as many of you will know on the call, there is a lot of uncertainty on the regulations. Even in different commission websites, they state different things. So piecing the puzzle together is a complicated issue. So the last remaining sort of bureaucratic part is please remain muted, because if you don't remain muted, it really disturbs the experience for both me as a presenter and for other people on the call. So great. So we'll sort of crack on. We'll aim to have perhaps about 15-20 minutes at the end for questions or observations, and my colleague Sash will support us on this. I cannot see anybody on my screen, so again, if there's anything urgent, please wave your hand and Sash will see it. So Just Fashion is a Horizon 2020 project looking at multiple areas across circular and sustainable fashion across Europe with multiple partners covering EU member states and also UK. From looking at policy to to different work on circular business models, and importantly, a number of pilot projects exploring issues. So the context to the ESPR is that back in 2015, the European Commission really laid the foundations by setting up the Circular Economy Action Plan, the first Circular Economy Action Plan, and this was really the first comprehensive piece of circularity policy really in the world, and the Commission has really continued to sort of lead globally on circular economy policy. There's now over 100 national circular economy action plans around the world, according to Chatham House, the think tank, but the Commission really is driving a lot of this in a broader sort of geographical block. In 2020, the Commission published the second circular economy action plan. There isn't a third one at the moment, and within that they highlighted the forthcoming ESPR regulations and also the EU strategy for sustainable and circular textiles as the first strategic non-binding policy document, starting to indicate that the sector was becoming more of an interest for the Commission from a sort of regulatory point of view. There are the other key regulatory developments are the Green Deal Industrial Plan, and we'll particularly pull out of that the Circular Economy Action Plan. please, people, can you keep muted? You're getting better feedback coming in. Circular Economy Action Plan 2.0, really there's the key 2 points for time for this was this driver to make circularity and circular products and more broadly sustainable, and within that circular products, the norm in Europe, bringing in new sectors, particularly into the policy focus. Historically, on the product level, it's been focused on electronics and automotive and packaging, but this particular the action plan brought in new areas like textiles. Also of note, and often or sometimes a misconception, is that in 2022 the Commission set out the EU strategy on sustainable and circular textiles, and this really was a sort of strategic document setting out the sort of very broad aspects that the Commission was going to look at in terms of future regulatory development. So it wasn't a binding regulatory something that set law, if you like, but it set the sort of strategy for the future, which future regulations are flowing from, such as ESPR, separately green claims regulations, amendments to the waste directive that bring in EPR, which we won't be covering those other aspects today, but they'll covered in future webinars. So I just thought I'd bring out the Circular Economy Circular Economy Act very briefly at the moment, because this really is the sort of another big policy development from the Commission, and really it's looking to sort of expand a whole range of circularity aspects with a view to publishing some regulations by the end of the year. Initially seemed to start to focus with more of a focus on e-waste and electronic waste, but it seems to be broad. And based on a briefing document produced in January, the key elements that are emerging in terms of the direction that the Circular Economy Act may move towards is this sort of transition in mindset from waste management to a circular economy mindset within a more competitive European economy. Developing a single market for secondary materials, so retaining the value, in materials, products, and components within Europe. Going beyond recycling, expanding, reuse, repair, etc. Bringing digital solutions. Also looking at market creation. Again, the reinforcements of the potential expansion of the role of green public procurement, and perhaps a reform of EPR. So at the moment, with the amendment to the Waste Framework Directive bringing EPR, we're looking at different schemes delegated at a country level. Now, there is discussion going on and proposals coming in from various sources talking about, well, maybe it should be, a single market directive rather than delegated to member states. But at the moment, the legislation is saying it's delegated to member states. So I now sort of move into the main part of the presentation and what I'll be doing. I won't talk in detail to every slide, but we are recording this and we will share this after the event. So I may move over some of these slides quite quickly. So the ESPR came into force in the 18th of July 2024, and it's a significant piece of policy development. It was in its initial form, it was a framework directive, so it really set out the broad basis for future regulatory development, and primarily it builds on the eco-design directive that was focused on energy-related products and primarily focused on reducing energy consumption of those energy related products. So it really focused on sort of, maybe it was 30, 40 different products under, energy related products, but only really on one criteria: energy efficiency. And the broad goal was to shift towards a more circular economy, develop common rules, empower consumers through maybe the informational aspects, but we're also seeing through DG Consumer and Justice, we've seen the Repair Directive again, which is empowering consumers through other regulation. So there's more, part of the challenge of a lot of the policy development from that's targeting the textiles and clothing sector is it's coming from all sorts of different directions. It's not necessarily joined up. So key points: it's going beyond the Eco Design Directive. It's bringing new requirements, also looking at horizontal aspects, and also expanding not just on the product requirements, but also on product information. Importantly, and common misconception, is there are 6 elements to the ESPR. There's product regulations focused on eco design requirements. There's potential amendments to existing eco labeling and new labeling requirements, digital product passport, ban on destruction of unsold goods, green public procurement, and substances of concern. Some of these are more developed than others, but again, it is a complicated landscape, particularly when we bear in mind that this isn't just the only regulation that's going to impact on textile sector. There's a series of other regulations. So effectively, again, I'm not going to go into detail of this, but ESPR effectively, impacts on all organization placing products on the market. And with the issue of particularly the global supply chains related to clothing and textiles, inevitably a lot of the requirements will be passed back through the supply chain to Asia and other countries. So there is going to be a big aspect of these elements, or a number of the components of ESPR, that will impact on suppliers. And there will be a need in amongst those supply chain countries to start to build up new competence and capacity. And within the project, we're also looking at that area. And again, if there are people on the call from countries outside of Europe, who are interested to engage with us, please email us, and as we're also interested in those implications from the supply chain perspective. So the timeline, again, part of the complexity of many of you who are probably trying to trace and track a lot of these different regulatory developments. I mean, the key probably current timetable areas that are most relevant was this year on the 9th of February, the acts on unsold goods were passed. There will be an expected series of standards, European standards, emerging from March onwards. From sometime in the second quarter, focused on digital product passport. Again, we'll go into the detail of this. There is slated to be a central digital product passport registry that will become operational on the 19th of July. We're not clear about the current state of that, because I assume this is the Commission is working with various suppliers to develop this. And then most importantly, perhaps the best information we have is the first delegated act, which is likely to be on textiles, is going to be in Q2 2027. and then the requirements will start to flow in 2028, 29. Excuse me. So key element to look at, and there's going to be a lot of information and detail in this webinar, but a key element to look at and download, and it is downloadable, is to download the ESPR and energy labeling working plan. That really gives you, in sort of 15 pages or so, the sort of key strategic components of ESPR. There's really sort of talking about the drive to, circularity, enhancing, transparency, etc., etc. So the process is ESPR framework directive, working plans, and then importantly, from that flows product-specific measures and horizontal requirements. And particularly for textiles, there's a very detailed preparatory phase going on with very detailed reports that are being prepared on best practice, on research, trying to bring together all the complexity. At various points, there are reports that are produced that are then consulted upon with something called the Eco-Design Forum, and then following, the regulatory process, regulations are passed with an 18-month implementation process. Throughout the process, there are various forms of stakeholder engagement and input. So the Eco-Design Forum, I'm not going to go into detail, is a mix of member states, civil society and industry. Effectively, the member states are the key influencers. It's managed by, as I understand it, by DG Environment, and there's been 3 Eco-Design Forum meetings to date. And at those meetings, there are presentations and consultation, and questions are asked, particularly by member states, but also by others. So a key part of this, stepping that back a little bit, at some stage prior, somewhere between 2024, 2025, the Commission did a big ranking of product areas that they were considering for potential regulations under ESPR, and effectively they came up with a ranking system, and which they then divided into 2 elements: final products and intermediate products. And within that, they developed a ranking system to prioritize regulatory development. So within the final products section, textiles and apparel came out at the highest level, and there are other areas mentioned here below. But the intention is, as we understand it, although these are the items that are highlighted, that ESPR over time will cover all products and all markets. Certainly at the moment, various products are excluded: detergents, paints, lubricants, footwear, although something is separately being looked at on footwear as we understood it. Part of the evolution of this, footwear was originally within textiles and apparel, but the Commission took it out. But again, it may well be something separate. Chemicals as a sector excluded. So textiles included because high improvement potential, because the sector has significant environmental impact. We documented that in a book called Accelerating Sustainability in the Fashion, Clothing and Textiles Sector, that's available from Routledge. But, so it was a sector with high impact and high improvement potential. So, the Commission, prior to setting the detailed regulation, have set in stage this preparatory study. It says it's a study, but it includes lots of studies, and it's primarily focused on, clothing per se, rather than technical textiles and PPE. So within the project to date, or within the preparatory phase to date, there's been 3 detailed milestone reports published, and these are extensive documents um, that covered, different aspects of the regulatory development. I'm not going to go through in the detail now. We're getting towards the final stages of this, where the Commission is considering design options for the regulation and policy scenarios. The third milestone report was recently published. All of these reports are available, but they are very technical and very detailed. I'm not going to go through all the details of these slides, but I will pick up a couple of points, particularly from the last milestone report, which shows some of the challenges in trying to follow what the Commission is doing and thinking. So the key point was or is that, particularly in the component one, I'd call it, of the 6 components, the product regulation that is going to be based on eco-design requirements. Whilst we don't know specifically what those requirements will be, one can make a reasonable judgment that issues around durability is going to be an issue, because the Commission stated in the Circular Economy Action Plan number 2 that they wanted to sort of metaphorically make fast fashion history. These issues about low quality garments coming in, falling apart. So you can reasonably think that durability is going to be an issue that they're going to be looking at. But then they started to introduce this term robustness rather than durability. Now I don't know if there are tests, for example, on robustness in the English language. It's quite a broader, terminology. So, the Commission brought in new terminology into the latest report. Study that are obviously being looked at, but it's not really clear what they precisely mean, and is that the same as durability? Are they just substituting the words? Is robustness slightly different to durability? I mean, we can argue that in the English language, but in the sense of taking it down to testing for these issues in clothing, what does that mean? So, one of the sort of emerging topics, what does robustness mean? They also have brought in, apart from some of the circularity criteria that is being considered, they're also looking at potential carbon footprinting as well for clothing, or clothing and textiles. So the final study report will come out, as we understand it, during the second quarter, and this really will be the sort of end of the process that starts to look at the different sort of policy approaches, of which then they will be looking to develop the regulation from that, as I understand it. So, going down more into the detail of what will sit within the product regulations, and the 2 key things to sort of recognize is that there's going to be performance requirements in relation to the different products, and I'll come on to that in a second, and then information requirements, and there is going to be a sort of a relationship between the 2. So and importantly, if you're I would suggest you look at Annex 1 of the ESPR framework regulation. That really gives you in black and white the different potential performance regulations that the Commission are considering. Now, what is important now, there are 16 different product requirements that are sort of sitting out there, that they've identified, that they may extract different components related to different regulations. So what do I mean by that? So if you think about clothing and textiles, relative to, to an intermediate product like textiles and steel. They're obviously different types of products with different types of impacts. And so what the Commission will do in relation to the different product-based regulations is they will identify, based on a set of criteria, the most appropriate and most aligned product requirements to the different products. So, again, I'm highlighting here, they may, this is not, it's nothing's been published. They may consider repairability, durability, recycled content. They may consider other aspects as key performance, eco-design performance requirements. Whereas in steel, they may look at energy intensity, they may look at recycled content, for example. So they're going to select different requirement most appropriately, linked to different product categories. What they're also doing, to add a slight bit of even more complication, is that they're looking at horizontal requirements that will cross all products. So one of those areas is repairability, and they are in a report development process with various stakeholder meetings going on. At the moment, it appears that the most of the focus is around the historic energy-related products that are also now falling under, ESPR. Textiles and clothing haven't been excluded, but it's not clear precisely how they're thinking about will horizontal requirements come in for clothing and textiles specifically. So it's part of the difficulty of monitoring this. So second part is the eco-label. And as we understand it, we've got an existing EU eco-label for textiles and clothing, and based on the developments and the thinking around ESPR and eco-design, there may be some amendments to the existing existing eco-label, but also there is potentially going to be other types of new labeling associated with the ESPR. One of the challenges with the existing eco-label approach is it's a one-size-fits-all approach. It doesn't focus on the function or on functions. So, the existing preparatory studies have indicated that future requirements in relation to new labeling may be more product specific and more function specific. So we might even have different types of labeling related to different types of clothing products that have different types of compositions, maybe in terms of materials. There's been a preparatory consultation that's been completed, that was concluded at the end of last year around the label. And within that, they proposed potentially different types of prototype labels, which they ask you to vote on. So basically, they've sort of market tested some sort of eco-label approaches using, that may well come in under ESPR. And again, there may be hybrid examples, that they build on based on the existing energy labeling, classifications, but also bring in, other criteria such as highlighted below. So again, the exact format of this is unclear at the moment, but they are certainly testing this idea at the moment, or they have tested it and are analysing this. So again, in terms of these ESPR labels, they won't be called ESPR labels, but in terms of the new labelling, they're under development. They may be mandatory. They'll support product compliance. So again, one of the areas that's being discussed is that achieving the criteria for this type of of these new types of labels may fast track compliance with the product ESPR requirements. So again, there is a detailed report that's been completed that I don't plan to go into detail because of time, that really goes into a lot of the methodology behind particularly the labeling aspects that are being considered. It is very detailed. So again, I'll skip over that, but again, there's a report there that is available if you want to go into more details. Digital product passport, a real hot potato, hugely significant, hugely complicated, and with a lot of misinformation flying around. Essentially, it's a digital tool designed to provide comprehensive, transparent information about a product's sustainability and within that circularity journey. It will be accessed via unique identifier, and it will be the DPPs will not be horizontal; they will be aligned to different product regulations. So, skipping forward to 2027, as we understand it, there will be a product requirement regulation on textiles and a DPP textiles product regulation. So there will be, the product regulation on textiles first, then followed up by a specific one for DPP. And I'll go into some of the challenges with this. Again, they're looking at providing for the different needs of different audiences, consumers, business, public authorities. Again, as we mentioned earlier, it's originally highlighted and introduced within the ESPR. Whilst it is originated within ESPR, it seems to be, DPP seems to be emerging in all sorts of other regulatory development outside of ESPR. There is going to be a series of other regulations to effect set up requirements for DPP service providers, to set up a central registry. So there's a suite of regulations here. So one of the areas that they did consult on, they being the Commission consulted on, was on the requirements for service suppliers of DPP, consulting, software, etc. And as we understand it, the likelihood is that there will be requirements at a national member state level in terms of those service providers. Details of that are unclear, but I'll come on to that as to why that's also important. So very recently, the Commission has actually stated and published a methodology for defining data requirements for DPP. Again, quite long and detailed. There's really it highlights a whole series of issues that, again, as time is ticking on, I won't have time to go into detail today. We are running up a more detailed DPP webinar in a few months, so I think what I will just skip through here is I'll pick up some implications for SMEs in a short while. So there's a very detailed report that's just been covered that really covers many of the aspects of the current thinking on DPP. I think, again, as it's so complicated, if there's one thing to understand, please can people remain muted, that there are two aspects to DPP. There's the how and there's the what. So the how aspect of this is the IT elements, the information architecture of, how is the data going to be sort of captured, processed, communicated. And that is really being dealt with by a series of standards within SEN. And those standards cover many of the technical IT aspects, and those standards are pretty close to publication. The what part of this is going to be covered within the product regulation in 2027. So this really is not clear at the moment. One can make some reasonable assumptions by looking at the annex that I mentioned, by thinking about the sorts of product requirements linked to clothing and textiles, but it's important to understand that has not been defined. So if you have any software supplier or consultant who's telling you that they can provide you with a compliance service for DPP, I'd suggest you delete the service. We're already seeing significant problems with people being sold into contracts and software, and people trying to sort of extract themselves from those services. So I suggest you keep your radar up about this. Again, there is a whole DPP registry going to be set up at a DP portal where different stakeholders are going to have different access to different types of information. There's whole lots of issues there around what types of information will stakeholders have access to, confidentiality, etc., etc., etc. So the timeline, as we understand it, is that this registry will become operational from 2026, but we really don't know the state of play on that. With a lot of these areas, we're seeing delays. We're seeing perhaps the first, DPP will come in the battery area that's outside ESPR, and then the delegated act, the product regulation and the DPP regs for textiles, where the best information we have is Q2 2027. So importantly, standardization is starting in the area, and the most important, and most developed group is within SEN. So there's the SEN JTC 24 is due to publish a suite of standards that I'll highlight in a short while. Again, as I mentioned in Q2. So this is the global listing that we've understood in terms of standardization that's happening around DPP. So there's the JTC 24, which is the Joint Technical Committee on DPP that has been running for a couple of years now, and is close to publication, as I said. Now, the key point here is that these standards are developed by the members of SEN, which include European member states and other European countries. One of the challenges for this that I see as sort of being involved in an expert committee, although not directly involved in this, is that obviously clothing textiles is a global supply chain, but within the framework of and scope of SEN activities for standardization, non-European players are not able to be engaged in that process. So there's a real challenge for me around how you engage the global supply chain in this area, and that's why you're starting to see international standards developing. So ISO and IEC have set up a technical committee this year to look at digital product passport. There is also another more another broader ISO committee, TC 154, that has set up a working program, preliminary work item. IEE have set something up, and also there's China DPP in process as well. I'll just flick through quickly SEN JTC 2024. Essentially, they've really developed at a very fast pace under the Commission. They're really the first. They were requested by the Commission to start standardization in May 2023. They set up 4 working groups, and within that, what we're expecting in Q2 is these 8 standards to be published. So again, you can sort of see this is dealing with the how part of it, the information architecture, but not the what part of it. So that's a clear distinction. And again, the process is in development, and the best information we have is they are due to be published in Q2. Again, I'm going to skip over this for time. And also, I just highlight 2 of the international standards. So the ISO IC standard has now been set up, JTC 5, and this is really looking at things much more at an international level. So this will allow a much more of a global discussion there, bringing the supply chain issues. There are these other workshops, but also I'd highlight that what we're seeing is that China is getting involved in quite a number of those other ISO standards, but also have its own DPP development. We saw similar things happening in the electronic sector when we had European RoHS, restriction of substances for the electronic sector. China set up China RoHS. So China is very much keeping an eye on this. So key point to this, going back to the earlier point, is we're seeing a lot of misleading claims. We call it DPP washing. So it goes back to the point, if anybody is claiming to provide compliance services for DPP, I would be very wary of them. So key points to think about is in relation to DPP, and we're running a little bit late. So again, it may be that we run over by 10-15 minutes for questions. So again, just a warning there. So key actions for SMEs particularly is to start to map existing product data, to look at how your product data is structured, look at your data ownership, structures internally. Start, particularly if you're a brand, start discussion with your suppliers early, because although we don't know the details, we're going to have standards soon. We don't know precisely what's going in there, but it's coming. So again, the more we start to look at the relevant data issues early, the better. And again, sorry for skipping over that. We will cover this in more detail at a later webinar. So key other aspect of eco-design for sustainable products regulation is the recent passing of in February of the ban on destroying unsold goods, and this is particularly relevant for the textile sector that has been highlighted as a sort of one of those sectors that is destroying items before the end of the final end of life. So I think I will really just skip to this slide here, and what we're seeing is, this is a good summary here. So really the main requirements are going to be on large companies, and there'll be a requirement to disclose various information around the destruction of items. This will also come in at a later date for medium-sized companies, and there won't be any direct obligations on SMEs, although there may be implications in terms of, again, the supply chain. There are 2 types of regulation associated with this area. One is implementing regulation that really sets up the reporting requirements, again, particularly for the large companies, around how they tackle the issues of discarded unsold goods. And then there's the exclusions, what can be excluded. So again, particularly for SMEs, some of the implications are perhaps in increased data requests from large customers, stronger inventory and overstock management expectations. So there may be tighter forecasting coming in, greater focus on returns and alternative recovery channels, higher quality assurance requirements of supply chains, more stringent commercial and contractual requirements. So although SMEs are not, and suppliers outside of Europe are not in directly impacted, the likelihood is things will flow through the supply chain in various forms. So I'll skim through green public procurement pretty quickly, because there aren't specific product related requirements that are highlighted yet related to textiles. The Commission has been for many years talking about green public procurement, even going back to something called integrated product policy in the early 2000s, but really not implemented this in a mandatory base. So, they'll be they are proposing potential mandatory GPP requirements that take account of the life cycle. But again, nothing specifically for textiles, although, perhaps there might be requirements on corporate clothing, for example, maybe for those government officers that buy uniforms, maybe they're going to be requirements. But again, for those of you who are in those sorts of clothing supply chains, maybe it would be useful to look at this recent report that the Commissioner or JRC has published. Substances of concern, again, is one of the components of ESPR. But again, there's a lot of sort of detailed analysis, but there isn't necessarily a lot of detail in terms of the actual specific requirements in terms of substances of concern yet. So under ESPR, substances of concern includes substances that meet one or more of the following criteria. So they're substances of very high concern, so which aligns to REACH, and REACH is being reformed to bring in more simplified processes. It's a significant piece of regulation, but that is currently delayed and has been delayed for a while. So the other element of this, in terms of the criteria, is substances that are classified as relevant hazard substances under the CLP regulation, those that are regulated under the POPs regulation, and particularly most relevant in the circularity element of this, substances that negatively affect reuse or recycling of materials and products. So they act as a barrier to circularity. So this is a sort of new type of requirement in terms of chemicals that will be further elaborated. Again, chemicals have been covered in the milestone reports, and again, for those of you who are particularly need to follow through and think through what the implications from ESPR in relation to chemicals, the Commission have published a detailed report here. So just moving to the end of this, and sorry for moving so fast through the material, but there is a lot of information and it's all very complicated and often quite fragmented. So it's a big challenge to try and bring something together in a relatively coherent presentation. So some of the key implications in the 6 components are product regulation. In the product regulation, it is coming. The details are unclear, but if you are a designer or producer, to start to sort of think about areas around durability of garments, repairability, recycled content. Maybe it's worth considering setting up some pilot projects around your different types of products in terms of those requirements. Again, similarly, those thinking about that from a brand point of view, how will you start to tackle this in terms of supplier engagement? Digital product passport, starting to sort of get a much tighter handle on product related data and the environmental aspects of product related data. What are you collecting? have you collected information from your suppliers previously? Is that in a coherent form? In terms of ban on sold goods, particularly for SMEs, starting to really sort of think through any of those implications. You'll be closer to the sector than us, so if brands start to tighten up their forecasting, and their processes in terms of provision of products, will that mean that they're going to be buying less products? What other aspects may come into it? Will they have a need for more durable products? Therefore, quality assurance issues will be strengthened. Green public procurements. Do you have any governments in your supply chain that procure uniforms that perhaps might face GPP requirements being passed through the supply chain? Continue to track the substances of concern, and particularly start to think about those chemicals that might prohibit circularity, recyclability, and start to think about and discuss with maybe marketing departments implications of new types of labeling that might come in that start to highlight, on labeling, performance related to durability, repairability. We also see this coming through in a related area, not in ESPR, but there's a separate set of regulation that is now being transposed around green claims that is going to require much clearer information around circularity. So again, this is part of the challenge. A number of things from a business point of view relate, but they're separate from a regulatory point of view. So just in closing, our proposal is, because there is so much regulation that is in the pipeline, really, particularly at an SME level, to start to make regulations a standing board item. Allocate somebody, half a day a week if you can, to start to monitoring these developments, develop a plan, track the regulations, track, whether the deadlines that are emerging. We are starting to do this, and in our latter webinars, we will have a clearer listing of timelines associated with this. Start to think through the implications in terms of strategic planning, when these regulations come into place, what will the world look like? So you're going to have to look at this in terms of strategic planning, design, procurement, etc. Start early stage discussions with suppliers, even at a basic level in terms of environmental awareness. Start to get a better handle on product data. How much knowledge do you have about the environmental impact of your products from a life cycle perspective? And again, there are many uncertainties still. And again, I think probably we still don't know what part of the regulations. We don't know for certain when precisely the textiles regulations and DP regulations will come in. Really unclear about the specifics of substances of concern. The whole testing mechanism for this is unclear. How are you going to what sort of methodologies are out there to test for durability or repairability of clothing, for example? So there's a whole area that will need to be developed there. Still a lot of uncertainty around the labeling. What aspects of the existing eco label are going to be adjusted, reformed, whatever the right word is there. Are they going to be changed? What will emerge on these new labels? Again, will they be mandatory? Will they be voluntary? And there's a lot of uncertainty around the, again, DPP particularly, So, and again for time, because I know we're pretty much over time now, or I've hit 11 o'clock. So I think for everybody's time, I'll leave that slide there and highlight that we will be running a more specific webinar on DPP in a couple of months. What we'll also be doing is, for some of you who have attended previous webinars, we have often incorporated content on standardization, but we're going to run a separate webinar on that because, again, there is a lot of activity happening on broader based circular economy, standardization at a sort of broad-based level, but also emerging activity in the clothing sector as well. So again, thanks again for bearing with me, and apologies for having to go through that so fast, but hopefully you found at least something that was useful from the presentation. So I don't know, Sash, if we have any questions have come in, or
yeah, we've just got one question. Is China textile DPP a Chinese standard, or does it refer to a material?
Well, as I understand it, the Chinese have set up within the Chinese standard system, they've set up a committee to look at a DPP approach within China. So again, it's I'm unclear at the moment whether it's focused on textiles per se or finished products, but the key point is that China have set up their own specific activities, and also they are engaging and chairing some of those ISO standards that are also in development, obviously because China is a big supplier in the sector.
Okay. That's it really. There is a request to send the links to the reports with the recording, which I think we could do. But yeah,
we will do our process. Yeah, we'll share we won't be sharing the PowerPoints, but we will share the link to the recording. We do have a couple of minutes for questions or observations if anybody would like to put their hands up. If not, we'll give us about.
There is one more question. Yeah. It's basically surrounding regarding the timing of the ban on the destruction of unsold goods. While the ban for large enterprises will apply from 19th July 2026, the disclosure obligations already apply from the first full financial year starting 18th July 2024. In practice, does this mean that a company whose financial year starts in February must collect and report data for the 2025 financial year, with the disclosure taking place in 2026?
Sash, I don't know if you have an answer for that one. I think again, well, is that something you have any observation on?
I just need to check the timeline again real quick. 1 second. Sorry. In the meantime, we can answer another question, which is what practical methodologies are companies currently using to measure durability and repairability, given that no standardized testing framework exists yet?
So no standardized testing exists that aligns directly for ESPR, but again, as I understand it, within the new circular textiles committee that SEN has set up, European standardization have set up, they are starting to develop some standards on durability. So if you bear with us for our standardization webinar, we'll present those standards, and we will likely have somebody from SEN to present and also the person who's from the Mirror Committee from the Circular Textiles section from BSI. So the answer is there are standards in development in a new SEN working group, but I can't give the details.
And one more question regarding the implication of DPP for textiles, aspects related to fiber identification, composition, origin aren't already covered by textile labeling regulation and its revision. I'm not sure.
Sorry, can you repeat that? Just I had a strange message that's just emerged on my screen on real-time text, which I've never seen before.
So it basically says, regarding the implication of DPP for textiles, aspects related to fiber identification, composition, origin aren't already covered by textile labeling regulation and its revision.
Again, can't specifically answer that question, but there is a revision to the textiles labeling that is current at the moment. So the direct answer is unclear on that. Sorry about that. But again, I would check on the revisions that are happening in the textile labeling regulations, the specific textiles labeling regulations, which are separate. So this is part of the challenge for this. You've got these at least 3 or 4 different elements that link to labeling or information provision and labeling. You've got DPP, which is a form of electronic information. You've got the potential revision to the existing EU textile label. You've got these potential performance related labels, and then separate to that you've got the textiles labeling regulations that are being revised, and then you've also got the transposition of in effect a green claims regulation that's saying that's highlight what you can say and what you can't say in terms of environmental aspects of clothing. So again, from a business point of view and from a communications and marketing point of view, you've got to be looking at all of those elements. The challenges from the Commission, they look at those all separately with separate people. But again, from a business point of view, you're going to have to come up with, some way to sort of evaluate and harmonize those from a business point of view, in terms of the messages, consistent messaging you get out, through all your communication channels.
Okay, I think that's it. Regarding the question on the ban on unsold goods, would it be okay if we looked into this in more detail and get back to them separately?
We'll pick it up in the DPP webinar that we'll be running. I think it's in June or July.
Okay, yeah. There's actually one more question. What DPP attributes are already in effect, if any?
Well, just again to clarify, DPP was highlighted in the framework regulation. What we're facing is the publication of the SEN standards covering information architecture. The what part of this, the specific attributes about what will go into the DPP for textiles have not been passed or confirmed yet. Again, the only thing I can say is take a look at the Annex 1 of ESPR. You can start to see the different criteria there, the 16 criteria, and you can sort of work on a process of elimination almost of what is not going to be covered. But again, looking at topics like durability, repairability, recycled content, carbon footprinting, it would be, I would suggest, a sensible area. Although we are not lawyers, this is not a recommendation, and this is not clear in the law yet.
And just to add, the latest report gives quite a clear direction on where it's heading. Again, it's not confirmed at all, but I think reading that report will give a lot of information. And we've also added a summary slide in our deck. So, yeah.
Okay, so any last minute questions or observations? So if not, thank you all for your attention. Hopefully there was at least one key point that was helpful to you. Hopefully it was more than that, but we'll have further upcoming webinars this year on DPP, on EPR, and on standards. So watch out for those in email and on LinkedIn. And I wish you a good rest of the day. So thank you all very much, and see you at the next webinar. And see you all. Sash, thanks very much. Catch up probably tomorrow. Okay. Cheers. Bye. Bye.